Welcome everyone to CannaRegs' first webinar of 2017. We're excited to have everyone on board and get into this super exciting topic. Well, at least it's super exciting for me, and I'm glad that there's this many people that want to hear me talk about local regulation in California for an hour. So with that, I'm just going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover today. If you have questions, you can type them in. At the bottom left, you'll see that option. And we'll get to them as we can. We'll probably take some pauses and look at them. We're going to kind of just let this go as it does naturally. So with that, I'm going to jump into everybody's favorite part, the disclaimer. We are not your lawyers. We are not giving you legal advice. This webinar does not create an attorney-client relationship. Do not act upon the information presented in this webinar without seeking professional counsel. Cannabis remains a Schedule I drug and is illegal under federal law. This webinar is not intended to assist you in violating any federal law. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump right in. We're going to try to cover a lot of stuff today. And before we do that, figured it'd be good to just see what kind of describes you so we can cater it a little bit. And you can pick multiple of these. So I'm just going to give everyone a second to click your answers. Give these a few more seconds to roll in. Looks like the attorneys are gaining on the consultants. But we got a fair bit of government in here. So it looks like we have a really broad range today, which is great because all this information is going to be applicable in different ways, much the way that CannaRegs as a company organizes our information. We make it accessible to lots of different people, and it's used in a lot of different ways. So it's good to have this mix in here. And let's continue onward. So just to give you an outline of what we're going to go over today. We're going to do just a little bit of background information. Then we're going to talk about local government regulation. Now, granted, the whole webinar is about that, but then we're going to kind of go and spotlight on some locations. We're going to discuss what you can do now. And then we're going to do a detailed analysis of the local ballot measures that passed in November. And yes, we put that in the end because we're going to make you wait for that. It's actually pretty interesting. Spent a fair bit of time getting really in depth with those and came up with some interesting stuff. So we're going to make you wait to the end for that. And then lastly, we're going to give a concise demo of CannaRegs. Some of you are already CannaRegs subscribers. Some of you might not even know what CannaRegs is. These webinars are something we do for educational opportunities, but these aren't our core business. We are a database. We aggregate laws and regulations from state, county, and municipal levels that are specific to the marijuana industry, and we are constantly monitoring day to day to help you all do your jobs. So let's get into a little bit of background. There's just a few things we'll want to cover before we get into the nitty-gritty. So what are some laws you want to know when you're dealing with local government in California? The Brown Act. Now, what is the Brown Act? The Brown Act is a law that requires cities to give 72 hours notice before a city council meeting. And that might sound like a lot, but it's only 3 days. And what does that mean? It means you constantly need to be checking on city council websites and agendas. Otherwise things are going to get past you. Legal precedents are going to be set, ordinances are going to be adopted, and so you have to be really aware. And granted, at CannaRegs we're watching every single day for this stuff, and we can't even give you the meetings generally that are on a Tuesday until the Thursday, Friday before, but there's a lot of cities that violate the Brown Act every single week. We had some agendas that went up this morning that got posted this morning in the meetings tonight. It happens all the time. It's a pain, but it's something we can at least take off your hands a little bit. But unfortunately, we can't provide people information any sooner than it exists. So in this time when there's lots of changes happening, it means that you need to be flexible in your schedules. And when something local comes up that matters to you, you're going to have to reschedule stuff, because the reality is they only have to give you 72 hours notice. The next thing I want to cover real quick is the law surrounding urgency ordinances. So a lot of people have seen since the passage of ALMA that there's been a bunch of urgency ordinances, and this allows basically the city councils to bypass a lot of the typical procedure, such as introducing a law, making it through first reading, then going through a second reading, and some other simple procedural stuff. Rather, they can pass an urgency ordinance upon introduction and adoption. However, it requires a 4/5 vote of the council to adopt an urgency ordinance or to extend an urgency ordinance. Furthermore, when you first adopt an urgency ordinance, it's only effective for 45 days, and then it will expire unless it gets extended. And at that point, you can extend it for up to 10 months and 15 days, and then you're allowed to extend it one more time for up to 1 year. Another thing we want to talk about real quick is law adopted via council action versus a voter-approved ballot measure. Now, a lot of people don't understand this difference, and I've seen city attorneys explain it to council over and over again. So what's the difference? Well, when council adopts an ordinance through council action, it can be reversed via another council action, or it can be repealed or changed via a voter-approved ballot measure. In essence, it's not permanent. A voter-approved ballot measure is far more permanent. The only way to reverse, repeal, change something that's in a voter-approved ballot measure is with another voter-approved ballot measure. So, the same way that Obama could make some executive order right now, but in Trump's first day, he can reverse that executive order. Council sometimes, can take action, and the new council would come in and reverse that. If it's voter approved, it's not so simple. Now, why is local law so important right now? Under the MCRSA, I'm going to call it probably MCRSA here on out, there's a dual licensing mandate. So in order to apply for a state license, you're going to need a local license. And that's why everybody's focused on local law right now while we wait for the state's regulations to be promulgated pursuant to MCRSA. ALMA doesn't necessarily dictate the words you have to have a local license, but it says you have to comply with local law. And while the language of these two are a little different, the reality is I think they'll either sync up via a cleanup bill or through the regulations. Now that we've gotten that all out of the way, let's jump into the next slide. We're also just going to do a real quick timeline here. So Prop 215 passed back in 1996. 8 years later, we've got SB 420. Basically, California has medical marijuana law, but it does not create any sort of state regulatory structure. Now, this is different than any other state we've ever looked at. Every other state that's got a medical marijuana program, they passed state law first. Then cities came in and created more restrictive laws. Here in California, we've now been going for well over a decade with only local level law. And so it's been very fragmented and disparate, and so that's why we're in such an interesting situation. So then it seems like ALMA is going to pass, and the legislature decides, well, we ought to put a state regulatory structure in place for medical at least. And so they pass MRSA, which they changed to MCRSA to change marijuana to cannabis. And that created a lot of work for us. We had to go through the entire database and change every reference in California law to cannabis. But what that did was in October of 2015, it created a state regulatory structure. However, there was one error in the initial drafting, which stated that local governments had to adopt a comprehensive regulatory program by March 1st, ban it by March 1st, or lose or default to the state law. And so some were able to act very quickly and pass some laws. Others were just trying to maintain local regulatory control, and they started banning. And so Banapalooza started. Bans, 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 bans. Now, mid-January, rumors started spreading that they're going to remove this March 1st deadline, but at that point so much had already happened and the bans were rampant. But still several that were in process then stopped. Since then several have reversed their ban. A lot were just trying to preserve this local regulatory authority. So we have several months of medical laws being passed, and November 8th comes around. There's a million local ballot initiatives that get voted on, and ALMA, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. A lot of cities acted in anticipation of ALMA, so they put laws in place that said, if recreational passes, here's what we're going to do. A lot have taken action since then, and then several have waited for new council members to take their seats before taking action. That same reason being that another council action can undo the previous one, so people decided to wait. January 1st is the next big deadline of 2018 when the state must begin accepting applications. So, local government regulation. What are local governments legally allowed to do under MCRSA and ALMA? So, under MCRSA, they are allowed to regulate or prohibit any and all commercial activities that will be licensed at the state level. They can prohibit all personal cultivation by patients, and they can prohibit delivery from originating or terminating in their jurisdiction. Now, let's just go back one. While they were able to prohibit personal cultivation under MCRSA, that's kind of lost some teeth because they can't prohibit indoor personal cultivation under 64. And so it's quite hard for a regulator to come into your home and look at your personal plants and identify it as medical or recreational. So don't expect to see a lot of enforcement of this. So what can't local governments do? They can't prohibit a patient under MCRSA from using medical cannabis, and they can't prohibit deliveries from passing through their jurisdiction in transit. Go over to ALMA real quick. Under ALMA, they're allowed to regulate or prohibit any commercial activities that be licensed at the state level, prohibit outdoor personal cultivation. They can place reasonable regulations on both indoor and outdoor personal cultivation. Now, what's reasonable? People have been upset with what's been done in some places, and I think what's reasonable will likely be defined by lawsuits that are challenging some of these more demanding laws. What's not allowed? They're not allowed to prohibit delivery from originating or terminating in their jurisdiction, just like MCRSA. They cannot prohibit adults over 21 years of age from possessing up to an ounce of marijuana or 8 grams of concentrates and consuming it in private. And they also can't have an outright prohibition on personal cultivation of 6 plants indoors. That said, some cities are still trying to do it and passing ordinances to that effect. So Galt is one that did this in December. It was an interesting meeting because the city attorney said, we recommend we ban all this, and a council member specifically asked the city attorney, are you sure we can do this? I thought we weren't allowed to ban the indoor. And the city attorney said, yeah, we are. I assure you we are. And so naturally you'd think you could rely on what your city attorney says. So they did. And it's just a 45-day interim ordinance, so we'll see what happens when that comes up for extension. Similar story in Elk Grove. So what are the actions that our local governments are taking right now? A lot have done temporary moratoriums. And why are they doing this? Because they need time to figure out what they want to do. And this is a way to prohibit people from starting to up and get running on certain business types that are going to cause problems. They can outright ban all of the commercial activities, and many have. They can allow and regulate. And we're also seeing some that are doing delivery only. So there are several jurisdictions where they don't want commercial marijuana businesses in their area. However, they understand that there are patients that need access. So one example of that is Campbell. Now I'm going to throw in, as we go on through the rest of this, I'm going to start throwing out lots of cities and lots of examples because I want to bring this to real practical examples just so you can see how quick this is happening. So Campbell's meeting on the 12th, and they're going to introduce an ordinance to this exact effect. Prohibit all other commercial activities, allow delivery. La Quinta is probably going to propose something similar in the coming weeks. Their ad hoc committee, it's just wrapping up its work, and it sounds like they're ready to present council with an ordinance prohibiting all commercial activity with the exception of allowing delivery. The other thing that we're going to see a lot more of is ballot initiatives. Yes, we had a lot this fall, but there's going to be more this spring. So Bellflower, they just adopted Ordinance 1332 on December 12th. It's a tax initiative, and it's going to go to the voters on March 7th of 2017. Burbank is actually having a meeting tonight, and what they're looking to adopt tonight is an ordinance ordering a special election on April 11th to submit another tax measure specific to marijuana businesses. Campbell also meeting tonight. Yes, Campbell's also talking about delivery, but they're also talking about calling for a special election to put a gross receipts tax on it. So who knows what Campbell might do thereafter. It's interesting if they're only interested in delivery. Perhaps they're looking in this direction so that they can go adopt a tax ordinance and then reevaluate. And then there's also the big election, big vote in March in LA. So for the places that are allowing and regulating, they have a lot of decisions to make. So what are the different issues they're addressing? So first of all, what types of facilities to allow? Are they going to allow everything, or are they just going to allow cultivation, just manufacturing? How many are they going to allow? So there's a bunch of different ways to go about this. You can allow an unlimited number and then let the market dictate, or let zoning distance requirements, etc., dictate how many there will actually be. So for example, Arcata, it doesn't cap the number, but it limits it to these two small zone districts, and they're pretty much entirely leased. So you could probably count the number that it's going to be in Arcata. That said, a lot of places have gone in and placed caps. So Cathedral City is an example of that. They placed a cap at 15 cultivation facilities, 2 manufacturing, 2 transportation, 2 testing, 2 distribution, and 1 dispensary for every 13,000 residents with a maximum of 2. So right now there's 1, and if they reach a population of 26,000, they'll allow a second one, and 2 will be the tops. Another example is Bellflower. They're meeting on January 23rd to consider Ordinance 1323, which would allow 12 marijuana businesses in some combination between cultivation, dispensary, and manufacturing. Now, at that meeting they're also going to provide some direction on delivery, transportation, security plans, and education requirements. But I just want to give you a little heads up. When you go back and look over these slides, which we're going to distribute after this, you might be a little confused because we just talked about Bellflower for a tax measure. Now we're talking about Bellflower capping, and these ordinance numbers are really similar. So they passed Ordinance 332, yet on the 23rd they're going to hear 1323. It's a lower ordinance number, so you would assume it would have been passed by now. It's not a mistake. This 1323 was originally supposed to be adopted on November 14th, and then they pushed it to November 28th. At the November 28th meeting, they also introduced 1332, which was the tax measure. And then they decided to table this bill for the capping of it until January 23rd. I can't recall the exact reason why, because we look at so many cities every single week. But I'm guessing they wanted to see first whether or not they would be able to successfully adopt the tax measure, and then they could make a more comprehensive bill that wouldn't just encompass what 1323 was going to do, but also anything that would need to be covered thereafter based on the tax bill. Other decisions being addressed by council, zoning and land use. So requirement of a conditional use permit, distance requirements, that being how far from a school or any sort of sensitive location. A lot of this is defined in state law, but it can be more restrictive at the local level. They also are limiting it to certain zone districts. There's some trends in there. A lot of cultivation has been limited to industrial and manufacturing. Manufacturing's in a lot of manufacturing zones. They're also dealing with fees, odor control, security measures, operations plans, application and licensing procedures, inspections and enforcement, transportation, and food handling. So now we've gone, we've been a little broad. Now we're going to get a little bit more in detail. So first we're going to talk here about a few places that have recently adopted laws allowing for commercial marijuana businesses. First one we're going to look at here is Linwood. So Linwood adopted an ordinance on December 20th of 2016. The exact ordinance number is not yet known. We know that it passed. We got confirmation from the clerk, but the final signed version has not been circulated yet. But this ordinance allows for medical cultivation and medical manufacturing. The manufacturing is going to be allowed in Zone M manufacturing. Cultivation is in a few different commercial areas as well as specific plan. All the cultivation must be indoor cultivation. Dispensaries are still banned. And it places a cap at no more than 5 licensed premises of any license type classification specified in 19300.7 of MCRSA. Now, that actually leaves a little bit of ambiguity because this could be interpreted to basically just mean, okay, we're only going to allow for 5 manufacturing and 5 cultivation facilities. But there's different size facilities. Yes, we know we're limited to indoor, but still that could mean 5 type 1A, 5 type 2A, 5 type 3A, 5 type 1C. So we're talking either 5 cultivation facilities or 20 cultivation facilities. And then you've also got type 4. You could have 5 type 4s, 5 type 6, and 5 type 7. Between the cottage and everything else we've got. So it could be 35 businesses. It could be 10, to be determined. I'm sure they will come out with some guidance on that. I just have no idea. In the Linwood ordinance, they also included these development agreements. This is an interesting one because this is in addition to like the common requirements you would see that we discussed above, that application, security, odor control. This is really specifically about outlining a plan for public outreach and education and community service. Now, what I think is the most interesting caveat, hands down, on this Linwood ordinance was that they're allowing for no change in ownership or change in location. It literally says any owner of a medical cannabis business who obtains a permit under this chapter may not sell, transfer, pledge, assign, grant an option, or otherwise dispose of his or her ownership interest. So I really hope you like your business partners if you decide to go into business in Linwood. Now, I don't know the legalities of the abilities to to transfer property interests. That's something to talk to a lawyer about, whether or not this is something that might get challenged. But furthermore, the location can't be changed either. The location shall only be the geographical area that is specified and accurately described in the executed documents verifying lawful possession. So basically, the address you give is the address you must stay at. And the exception to that is you could relocate to other areas within the actual approved business building structure, and you would still have to submit an application to do that. But you're stuck in the geographic area, in that address. And so I guess that might mean you probably want to own your building because you're otherwise hostage to your landlord, and they could do whatever they want because you're not allowed to move your location. Again, City Council can make further action down the line and change these things. But that is how it is today. The next one I want to jump to is Maywood. I find Maywood to be particularly interesting because the city is just over 1 square mile. So who would have known there would be even room for it and that they'd put this effort in. But Ordinance 16-03 was adopted on December 28th. And it allows for cultivation, distribution, manufacturing and processing, and dispensaries. Also notable is that the definition of dispensary encompasses delivery. And quite honestly, there's just a lot of details that still need to be sorted out, such as fees and whatnot. So it'll probably be a while before that's ready to go. Now, contrary to Maywood, Hollister is quite a robust ordinance that just got passed. It's quite robust, but it's not unreasonable. While many other localities might not require such in-depth measures, the state law is likely to require a majority of what's required in this ordinance. So in some ways it's just good practice for what lies ahead. And while it might seem scary at first, I don't think it should really be a big deterrent for looking to businesses in Hollister. So with that, I'm just going to jump in. So Ordinance 1131, it was adopted on December 19th. It allows for medical cultivation, dispensary, manufacturing, distribution, transportation, and testing. There is no outdoor cultivation allowed, but it does allow for indoor cultivation and greenhouses if they meet certain requirements. The same sort of masking of visibilities the way that an indoor facility would be, and there's a lot of details in there. I could probably spend the entire hour just going through the Hollister ordinance, and I'm not going to do that to you. It is limited to 2 dispensaries, and those 2 dispensaries are allowed to do delivery. The ordinance does not place a cap on the other allowed license types, but it does give the City Council the authority to do so via resolution. Resolution is much easier to pass and adopt than an ordinance, so they could cap this at any time. So just something to be aware of. Now, a really interesting caveat here was the residency requirement. At least 75% of the owners and managers of a company have to have been California residents for 3 years prior to the date of application. So Hollister is basically saying, we want to protect California residents. We won't want big business coming in from outside. And it's an interesting one. They also have to attest that they'll give preference to residents of the city of Hollister when they're hiring employees. So they don't have to, and I don't know how they're going to quantify this, but they do need to say in a written attestation that they will give preferential treatment to the citizens of Hollister when they are looking for employees. Much akin to Linwood is these development agreements. In fact, they're nearly identical language. They also have in here the delivery originating outside of the city and terminating in Hollister is allowed, but if the person delivering is permitted by the jurisdiction that they're delivering from and obtains a business license from Hollister. So let's just say that Campbell allowed delivery. I would have to have the proper permissions from Campbell, and granted, it's going to be a really long drive, but I'm just doing it because we talked about Campbell earlier. Not only though do I have to have that license from Campbell, I'm also going to have a business license in Hollister to deliver to a patient in Hollister. Hollister went on to even include packaging and labeling requirements, hours of operation, even referenced the enforcement priorities in the Cole memo. They still do, however, need to develop regulations to implement the regulatory permit process. So while it's a hefty one. We're still not good to go yet. That said, you have a lot more clarity in Hollister than most places, and you would know what you're signing up for. So we're going to talk about some more unique situations that are worth highlighting. And I just had to have fun with this one because Hollister is one of the most interesting places, and I've been watching it so closely, and I'm pretty sure we have a few Hollister people on here, and they've been dealing with this ban crew for a bit, so I wanted to make a little fun with this. And now let's just go and give a little backstory here. So there has been cultivation happening in Calaveras County for quite a while. It's a very rural county, about 3.5 hours outside of the Bay. And what happened was about 1.5 years ago, the Butte fire hit, and it cleared a lot of land. And there was a big land grab. So a lot of people, there was already a lot of cultivation, but a lot of people specifically bought land because it was cheap to buy in Calaveras and started growing. Now there was rampant growing everywhere, and they had to do something about it in the county, and so the county adopted an urgency ordinance that would allow for cultivation. But before anybody could even know whether or not they would ever be allowed, they had to have evidence that they were cultivating prior to a certain date, and they had to register with the county. And there was a pretty quick deadline for this, and just shy of 1,000 people registered. About 766, forgive me if I'm off by a couple, I believe were commercial cultivators. The rest were personal, and in order to submit this application, you had to pay $5,000. All of a sudden, the county, who has one sheriff on staff, has $5 million. Well, it takes a little while and some time to ramp up. Now granted, we're talking a rural county of under 20,000 people. Everyone has to go to the same grocery store. Long story short, there's 2 ballot initiatives that go up for Calaveras on November 8th. One is to allow and regulate so that it will replace the urgency ordinance, and the other is to tax. The tax bill passed. The allow and regulate failed. And the bansters came out victorious. That said, all of a sudden, this county that had no means is now hiring sheriffs. It's been approving lots of applications. They're not through all these applications. They had to train people, hire people, and whatnot. So right now they're working towards trying to create, I know there's groups that are working with the county to try to create a permanent ordinance, but if that permanent ordinance does not get adopted by the time this urgency ordinance expires, then it's done. And the worst part is they already know everybody who's growing. So enforcing it wouldn't be so hard. And in fact, it got published in the newspaper there, and that was kind of a scary situation. So let's go into, we're going to do one more fun one here. And we're running a little behind on time, and so I kind of think that this kind of says it all. Oakland, was one of the very first to have laws. They've been a front runner for a while. Now they're starting to fall behind for many reasons. The equity permit program, while good in theory, has its problems, and there's just a lot of infighting. And it sounds really nerdy, but we watch a lot of them, and this is kind of one where it's kind of fun to watch. I feel like I'm watching Bravo. So to make sure you guys are all still with us and awake, we got our next survey. Was that too mean? Yay! Apparently we're funny. I know we can't hear everyone else, so it's good I'm not just laughing at my jokes by myself. Maybe Bravo will pick it up. So some more places to look at that are pretty interesting. Stanton. So Stanton is also meeting tonight. And they're meeting with regard to a referendum to repeal portions of what would have been Ordinance 1060. So what happened here is, in anticipation of the passage of ALMA, Stanton City Council adopted Ordinance 1060 on October 25th, and it was going to establish zoning regulations that limited marijuana business activities to the maximum extent allowed under Proposition 64. However, prior to the effective date, which pursuant to state law would be 30 days after its adoption, a group of Stanton residents and proponents timely filed a petition seeking to repeal portions of the ordinance by referendum that would virtually repeal all of the restrictions on marijuana use, cultivation, businesses, etc. that were contained in that ordinance. So they were able to try to stop this from going into effect. And pursuant to the California Elections Code, the City Clerk's Office verified that the petition did contain enough signatures to qualify the referendum for a ballot. It needed 10% of the registered voters. It got that. And under this Elections Code, basically, the City Council would be prohibited from enacting another ordinance in the same or substantially same manner as Ordinance 1060 for at least 1 year. So this, the way this works is the referendum means it goes to a vote. And if this vote passes, then council can't do anything for a year. It basically means it's open. It's open for a year there. So what options does this leave council with? They have 3 options under the Elections Code. They can repeal the challenged ordinance themselves and try to work together on something that's more mutually beneficial. They can submit the referendum to a vote at the next regular municipal election. A regular election is one where council members are elected, and that would be in November 6th of 2018. Or they can submit the measure to voters at a special election no earlier than 88 days after council calls the election. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tonight. This is one that I really wanted to bring up because I think a lot of people don't know that this is something that can be done and that does happen. And so with that, we've got our next survey question. Were you aware of the Stanton referendum prior to this webinar? This one, we're going to hide the results so you can be honest. We're just kind of curious and trying to scope out what people do and don't get to learn about. Well, there are 5 incredibly smart people on this webinar, and I'm guessing that you 5 might live in Stanton. I think the rest of you are all really smart though, because you got on this webinar. And I didn't know about this until 2 days ago. So some more interesting things and places to highlight real quickly. So in December alone, we being CannaRegs, we tracked over 160 city and county level meetings in California that were marijuana specific. They all had a marijuana specific agenda item and they were city and county sanctioned meetings. So we're not talking any conferences or anything to that effect. We've also learned that Tuesdays are by far the most popular night for city council meetings in California. I wish I could be in a million places at once on a Tuesday. Tonight we have 24 on our calendar, 24 cities that are meeting on marijuana specific agenda items. Everything from things like Stanton to tax measures to extensions of moratorium to specific zone approvals, you name it. Another one I wanted to bring attention to real quick was Willits. So Willits is up in Mendocino. They're also meeting tonight, January 10th. And the staff is recommending that the council create an ad hoc committee to work with staff and create a comprehensive regulatory scheme for commercial marijuana operations. Now, okay, we've heard and seen a lot of ad hoc committees, and that doesn't sound that thrilling. This one I think is quite different. Usually the ad hoc committee is going to do the exploration. This ad hoc committee is actually going to be more so doing the writing. It looks like they've done quite a bit of exploration. The working group has met 3 times already. They've held 2 community workshops. So it looks like this is really going to be a group that's going to be drafting something and that they have some significant direction. So if you're up north, this is something to keep an eye on. While we're still up in that Emerald Triangle, Humboldt County been leading the way for a while. On December 30th, the applications were due there. They received 2,337 applications. That said, on Sunday, they published a letter from Director Ford. Now, Granted, this letter is dated January 4th. Presumably that's when they must have sent it out to the applicants, but it wasn't published online until Sunday. And in this letter, some of the highlights were that there were, of these 2,337 applications, over 2,000 were known to be incomplete at the time of submittal. In the next 2 weeks, what they're going to do is work towards making decisions on the ones that were completed. The week after that, they're going to focus on sending out letters to those who have incomplete applications, explaining to them what is missing. Because they're sure there's still going to be a lot of questions, they're staffing cannabis planners at the counters in Humboldt on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And they've also scheduled 2 group assistance meetings on January 12th and January 19th. Trinity County. They extended their application deadline to February 28th, 2017. La Mesa. They passed Measure U in November. So in La Mesa prior to this, it was banned. Now they've repealed this ban on medical marijuana dispensaries, manufacturing, and cultivation effective January 13th. Such businesses will still need a conditional use permit and are subject to zoning restrictions, etc. And there's quite a bit. But they held an informational meeting yesterday on that. And hopefully they'll have some more information from that meeting posted here soon. And we're tracking all these closely. Another random one that's in there, Port Hueneme is holding a second ad hoc committee. It's a cannabis exploratory committee. They had one, I believe it was last week. They have another one next week. This is all on the CannaRegs events calendar. Chucky is hosting a 4-part series of monthly workshops beginning in February. I believe the first one might be February 9th, and then the second one's March 9th, and then there's one in April and one in May. Infer what you want from it, but the fact that they're doing 4 says something, and that they've put out the notice this far ahead. Something else to be aware of, the League of Cities. So the League of Cities is hosting 3 meetings in the coming weeks. Now, the League of Cities, oh, the League of Cities. So the League of Cities outwardly states that they don't have a position. But they're pretty much known to be anti-marijuana for the most part. And they're not allowing anyone into these meetings other than members of the league that are city members. So what's going to happen there, who knows? The only reason these came up on my radar was because, again, we have to listen to a lot of city council meetings to find out results. If we were to sit and wait for results all the time, we'd have to wait for minutes, and it would take weeks and weeks and weeks, and people need more actionable information. So we listen to a lot of meetings, and we also call a lot of city clerks. But it was in listening to some of these meetings that I heard a couple cities push off action items to further dates to wait until after they'd attended said League of Cities meetings. If anybody who's on here wants to tell us what's happening, I'd be very interested, because I know we definitely have some government on here. So another thing that I thought would just be interesting to share with you is who from California sent people to the Denver Marijuana Management Symposium. The Denver Marijuana Management Symposium, basically Denver got too many calls every single day for a couple of years with other cities asking for help. So they decided they would throw a conference and spew everything they could. This is the second year of it. Take what you will from this. So what can we be doing now? And I'm going to start to go through some of this stuff pretty quick because I want to get to the ballot measures, and we may go over, and hopefully you guys can stand a little longer. The good news is this is being recorded, so if you can't, we're going to distribute it anyway. But hopefully you're still baited and wanting to stay on a bit longer here. So what can you do now to help affect policy? So you can show up at council meetings. Now, we highly recommend that you organize your people before going to these meetings, because there is this time where there's public comment and each person gets 3 minutes. But if everybody just shows up and says the same 3-minute speech, it's repetitive and it's not all that effective. Rather, if each person could use their 3 minutes to cover an important subject thoroughly, and because everyone is organized ahead of time, and cumulatively you present multiple persuasive points, and it will present as one strong thesis, then you're probably going to be able to do more to affect policy. We recommend keeping personal feelings out of it when giving public comment. No clapping, no hooting. Respect all the speakers, even the ones you disagree with. Having, again, watched so many of these recordings, there is nothing that upsets council more than people being disrespected when they're speaking. Even when the council members don't even like what those people are saying either, they just really don't appreciate the disrespect. And so being respectful towards one another is going to get us further, no matter what side you're on. Personal anecdotes are fine. So when I say keep feelings out of it, that's fine. It is okay to say, I was brought into this because X, Y, and Z. One really important thing though is listen to the actual concerns of council. We find a lot of people take stances. One side's going to say, we want legalized, and the other side's going to say, we don't. But if you look for mutually beneficial outcomes, you might do better. And so I'm going to give a quick example here, and I recommend everyone read Getting to Yes. It's like a 150-page book, and it's the best thing I read in law school, written by 2 Harvard Law School professors on negotiation. And my favorite analogy from this is a story about these 2 boys who both wanted this one orange. There was one orange left, and they both said, I want, I want, I want, I want. And the mom couldn't figure it out, so she cut it in half. Each boy got a half of the orange. And one boy peeled the orange and ate the fruit, threw the peel in the trash can. The other boy peeled off the peel, threw the fruit in the trash can, and used the peel to peel it into his pie. If they had discussed what they actually wanted, the fact that one wanted the peel and the other wanted the fruit, they both could have had what they wanted. So try to look for mutually beneficial outcomes, right? If the issue that you're hearing again and again is it smells, tell them what you're going to do that's not going to, that's going to accommodate for that. Request for ad hoc committees to be created. Join local alliances, form local alliances. I tip my hat to the Calaveras Cannabis Alliance. I've never seen such a collaborative group ever. It never existed in Colorado, and I like to call it cooperation. And sometimes it takes being in these really tough situations like they have in Calaveras to really band together. But even when somebody's really upset, like they have a whole group, and I watch this religiously. It's an incredible Facebook page because it's a great social story. But somebody will get really riled up about something, and then someone else will come and talk them down and really organize the thoughts and put together a cohesive group. And it's really supportive, but not even just on policy. Somebody will rent a wood chipper, and it's a 4-hour rental, and they only needed it for 2 hours, and they'll just go, hey, who needs this? Donate $10 to a charity of your choice. Or they'll even help each other with random mites that show up on plants. And it's just this working together is making them all stronger, and it's an example people can look to. And I even, with that I say, in jurisdictions where there's multiple of these groups, come together and find your common ground and pool your resources. You're going to get more done. So some cities might not appear to be at all open for business, but I'm going to leave this slide in here. Has good ideas of what you can do. Really good example is Hanford. It's not a done deal yet, but it looks like Purple Heart might be able to open a 900,000 square foot facility in a former Pirelli tire factory. And they made a really compelling case in a place that wasn't even open for business. So things you can do to affect policy as well, just a couple more points. Educate council and your opposition. Again, if they, council members, remember, they have to deal with a million different subject matters. So they might not understand fully what you're trying to accomplish, and educate, just don't be condescending. And there's always that room for lobbyists. So what can you do right now? You can speculate property. Nothing's risk-free. If you have local license already, you can start preparing for state oversight. We keep very thorough checklists for this, which are updated regularly, and you can get a subscription to CannaRegs to stay on top of that. And we do have some time, so I am actually going to go into these ballot measures, but first I'm going to just look at the questions real quick and see if there's anything I can answer real fast. All right, we're going to go through those at the end because there's some interesting ones, but there's a lot that are kind of like detailed. And there's a lot of asking me about what about this and what about that. We just can't cover every single county, and so I tried to cover ones that all had kind of different scenarios in here today to give you a breadth of this. But there's just so much. I mean, we could do this every single day for a month and not get through everything. So with that, let's look into our analysis of the ballot measures that passed. So the ballot measures that passed in November, there are 4 general categories to this. There was taxation, there was regulate it as in allow it, there were tax and regulate simultaneously, so that 1 and 2 together, and then there were some cleanup bills that changed kind of definitions and existing tax bills to make them apply in certain ways. So breakdown. 70% of the bills that passed were tax specific. 17% were regulate, 9% were tax and regulate, and only 4% were really those cleanup bills. So the 2 most common types of taxes that were imposed by these ballot measures were percentage of gross receipts and dollars per square foot. There were some one-offs though that were less common. So there were dollars per unit. So for example, Cathedral City, it was like a dollar per unit of concentrated cannabis. There were some ones that were by weight. To say that would be Calaveras would be overly general. Calaveras has like multiple steps, but just one of the different iterations and points in time in the curing process, it's by weight. And then I even saw a flat tax in Gonzales. It was manufacturing and testing facilities had a flat tax of $30,000 a year. Now, to me, that doesn't exactly sound like a tax. That sounds a lot more like a licensing fee, but it passed as a tax, so it's a tax. So let's take a second here and just make sure we understand what gross receipts are versus sales tax. So sales tax is paid by the consumer based on the amount purchased. It's not an expense to the business owner because the amount owed to the taxing authority is no more than what the customer has paid. So I spend $1, the tax is 8%. I spend $1.08, the vendor still gets their $1, the 8 cents goes to the taxing authority. Gross receipts, on the other hand, is a percentage of revenue that's paid by the merchant to the taxing authority, which ultimately impacts your profit and loss statement. So a majority of cities that did these gross receipts allowed for up to X% via council action. So basically they set a cap. A few were fixed, but the vast majority were up to a certain amount. And others were set to rise at fixed dates. The ranges were all over the board, from as low as 1.5% to 20%, but a majority fell between 6 and 15%. The reality is that we don't quite know what these numbers are going to be, and it's hard to do a true statistical comparison on this because they need to still set the exact amounts. If they all go with the cap, it's not going to work because they're just going to stimulate the black market. It's too high. So in order to get any really great numbers and compare, the percentages here versus there, it was quite challenging because the cities are going to have to set that. But the highest overall was definitely Bay Area, like Bay-Sac kind of, and SoCal. Dollars per square foot. So when it came to dollars per square foot, a majority of it was the same rate regardless of the size or indoor or outdoor. So let's just say the amount was $10 per square foot. It wasn't affected across the majority of these measures by these factors. However, there were a few that set a price per square foot that was higher for the first X amount of square feet. So for example, in Coalinga, $25 per square foot for the first 3,000 square feet, but then it dropped to $10 per square foot for every square foot over that 3,000. This was most common. This stepped approach was in the Central Coast area. The price per square feet ranged all the way from $3 a square foot to $50 a square foot. a majority of them were in that $25 and over per square foot area. But again, it's hard to know or do any sort of statistical comparison because the exact amount still has to be set by council. And a majority of them were the up to X dollars via council action, though a few were fixed. And others were fixed with set dates at which they rise. Some notable taxes. Carson, it was 18% fixed gross receipts for any license type. That said, Carson does not allow any license types whatsoever right now for commercial marijuana business. And so perhaps this was just a way of saying, don't waste your time here, leave us alone, because no one might ever want to open up there if it's that high and it's fixed. Santa Barbara, up to 20% of gross receipts. Luckily it's not fixed, but that's still very high. And then San Jacinto, up to $50 a square foot for cultivation and manufacturing. So those ones were just very much stood out. Now, I tried to break down all this information and segment it. I tried doing a full coastal segment. I tried all sorts of different regions. And no matter how many different things we looked at, I mean, we even looked at certain regions. Were they more likely to break it up between medical and recreational? Were they, the reality was is we only found 2 regions after doing dozens and dozens of stats that had some statistically significant information. So 100% of the localities that voted on tax ballot measures in the Central Coast area had existing law on the books for some form of commercial marijuana businesses. Of all the tax measures that were voted on across the state, only about 57% actually had law along for commercial marijuana businesses. So the fact that the Central Coast was only places that already had law was quite different. They were also the most consistent tax rates of any region. There were some one-offs, but the general pattern was $25 per square foot and 10% gross receipts. Emerald Triangle. That was the other place where we were able to find some statistically significant stuff. Mendocino County was only 1.5% gross receipts on medical and 5% on recreational. Humboldt, $1 to $3 per square foot for cultivation. Point Arena, 3% gross on medical and 7% on recreational. Now, I think part of this is that these are much larger growing regions and there are far more people paying taxes, so they can do it. But also I think they're really interested in a sustainable market and understand what goes into this. Furthermore, a lot of what's going on up there is outdoor cultivation, tends to use up more square footage than indoor. So again, these are slightly more reasonable rates. I choose not to predict or try to interpret fully why, but these are what we found. So some Q&A. Are there any local jurisdictions in California that have a good regulatory structure that you would recommend to others that they look at when considering their own? Whew. That is a tough question. I think there are bits and pieces from many different ones that could be really strong and create one cohesive whole, but every single city has such different needs, and so you're going to have to look at places that are comparable demographically, geographically, all sorts of different makeup you're going to have to look at. One nice thing about CannaRegs is we allow you to search through our stuff by subject matter. So say that you wanted to put in place some odor control requirements, you could compare 50 different cities' odor control requirements side by side. But if you also had a really specific question, hey, what is Hollister doing on odor control? You can get there in 6 clicks. But I don't have the answer for that. CannaRegs, we try to just focus on delivering the facts and letting the consultants do their job too. Sacramento is a good one to look at. It's extremely comprehensive. It was about 80 pages or so, and that came out right before Thanksgiving, and it was a great Thanksgiving read. I swear it was the turkey that put me to bed, not the ordinance. Let's see. So someone asked, why would you say polling would be a good way to sway council that has stated that public perception is their biggest. I wasn't saying polling. I was saying pooling your resources. I apologize. Pooling your resources together, and then addressing concerns. There's too many questions in here, honestly. We will try to address so many of these when we send out the slides. I think it's just going to be too hard to get through them right now. And I'd like to take everyone who's still on board on a quick run through CannaRegs. We're going to do a really quick tour, super high level. And the reality is this tool is a really flexible tool, and it's for that very reason. We're going to be quick here because a custom tour is going to be far more valuable down the line. Because everyone uses this tool in a very different way. But let's just do the really quick 5-minute run through. So this is what you see when you first log into CannaRegs. What you'll see would depend on what state you're subscribed to. On the left side we have most viewed, self-explanatory, recently added, and top critical. Recently added because we're always adding new content. Top critical, this is something we really want to draw your attention to. This will be something that's going to be some very important action, amended regulations, adopted regulations, but not everything. We're tracking all the meetings, on the other hand, in the events calendar. So anything you see on this calendar is a city, county, or state sanctioned meeting, and it's marijuana specific. So let's click on here to see what today is. All of your blue dots are California. So here we'll have a whole list for you of what's going on today. And let's just say you wanted to know what's going on today in King City. So this is just a simple meeting where the council is going to consider alternatives and issues regarding preparation of an ordinance for cultivation and recreational marijuana. This is just consideration. This isn't an introduction of an ordinance or anything to that effect. However, if we came and we looked over at Stanton, you can see this is far more detailed, and they're dealing with this referendum issue. You want to go to any one of these meetings, you'll just add this to your calendar. You're good to go. Now you'll see that the rest of this month isn't quite so plush and filled out. Again, this is where that whole Brown Act comes into play. There's just not that much notice, and we only can give you as much as we know in advance. And honestly, this is a fair bit. But ultimately, January will end up looking somewhat like December did. Very busy. It's been very interesting to watch this all unfold, and I think we're just going to continue to see more and more. So when you want to come in and actually look at a city and see what's going on in that city, that's when you'll come in and you can use the browse if you just want to get a whole sense of what's happening. So we were just discussing Sacramento as a great example. We want to come in here and we want to see what's Sacramento doing and read their whole set of law. We can come in. We'll go to medical. You'll see all these cities. Now, it's interesting because in Colorado, if we did medical, we only cover about 10, 12 places, and that covers 90% of the licensed businesses. In California, that is not the case. So most of what you'll see here are places that either have law or working on law or have had something of significant interest. We would scroll down here to Sacramento, and let's just say we want to read their municipal code. Here we have all the municipal code that is pertinent to marijuana in it. So you're not going through pages of everything. If you tried to go look up this law right now on MuniCode, which would be the free codifier, it's not even codified yet. You'd be waiting months and you'll be sitting on stacks of ordinances. Now, let's say specifically, however, you heard that Sacramento did something really interesting with regard to odor control, and you wanted to be able to look at that right away. You didn't want to have to go through all of that. That's where Smart Search comes into play. So what we've done here in Smart Search is we analyze who these laws apply to and what they're about so that you're answering your questions the way that you would shop for shoes online. So much the way that you would go and say, I want women's shoes, black heels, size 9, and pumps. you've gone from 1,500 shoes down to 5. That's what we're doing with law here. So you'll see my user right now has access to 6,000 laws. But I'm going to search through them based on areas of interest. And once we pick one of these areas of interest, a bunch of minor areas of interest are going to drop down that allow us to get really granular in asking our questions. But I'm going to show you through these filters real quick just so you see, because this is one where once I've picked Nike, black suede is going to go away from my choices of brands. So we have all sorts of document types. Unlike your conventional database that might just have laws and statutes and regs, we have any official publication. So every form you need, any guidance document, you name it, we've got it. We make it searchable by license type, MedRec or hemp, location, and jurisdiction. So sticking with that first example, let's just say we wanted to know what has Sacramento done with regard to odor control in its newest laws. We come to California. We go to Sacramento. Let's say specifically we're most concerned about medical cultivations. Now you'll see there's far fewer document types left, right, because they didn't have the other document types, and these are all narrowing. This is probably going to be in their municipal code. If you don't know, you can leave as many of these blank as you want. Now we're already down to 30 results, but we're going to get really specific here. We're going to come in and we're going to go to operations, facilities, and transportation. We're going to get all these minor areas of interest. We're going to click on odor control, and we're left with one law. Now we've got the text of our law. Who issued it? Because we're taking from hundreds of places every single day. When was it issued? When does it become effective? You want to take a note on it? Great odor example. You've got your note. You save your note. It's always right here. Now let's just say we didn't find this one to be that pleasing, and we wanted to see, well, what have other cities all over the country done to deal with odor control? Well, some might put it in regs and some might put it in ordinances, so we probably want to expand the document types. And then we just expand from cities of Sacramento to all, and now we're looking at a whole bunch of different cities. Now let's say we just want to even see what places all over the country have done. Now we've got Boulder, Colorado's laws, California cities, Pueblo, El Dorado, Fort Collins. And now if you're a government and you're trying to figure out, hey, we want to write an ordinance but we really want to control odors, now you've got here 39 options that you can pick from that give you different ways that cities have dealt with this issue. And likewise, say you're going into a new place that hasn't dealt with odor, but you want to put best practices in your new facility as a licensed cultivator, you might want to look through these options to get ahead of the game, because inevitably this might come down the pipe at you, and why not be ahead of it? The idea is you can compare a lot of different subjects on here. Let's just say instead, you know that there's going to be a little bit of time before there's perhaps really detailed requirements for what your edibles need to say on them in California, but it's been done elsewhere. You can come to labeling and packaging. You can come specifically down to edibles, and you're in specific laws. Let's say you want to know, though, the state laws instead, and you want to know specifically regulations on this. Now you've got Nevada regulation and Colorado regulation on this. And so the idea is that you can really pick and play with this. You can answer questions that are very precise. You can answer questions that are broader. You can cross-compare. This is a great drafting tool. It's a best practices tool, and it's a day-to-day research tool. And most importantly, as the state laws come about in California, you're going to need to be able to track them, and we're tracking them extremely closely. And we're even trying to make documents and summaries and charts where these things are extra complicated. So we'll make what we call CannaRegs resources. And so one of the most popular ones we have out in California, we distributed it on our last California webinar, but it's different now than it was, because at the end of September, Jerry Brown signed 4 bills into law and vetoed 2, and they affected our laws, our statutes under MCRSA. And so this list had to get updated. And this is something where we give you a checklist. So what can you do now, right? We don't have regs, but there's a lot you can do right now. So you can learn about MCRSA. And we have a bunch of charts I'll walk you through. There's actions you can take now, such as preparing stuff for your state applications that are going to be required by statute. You can deal with your local law. Obviously, you guys all care about that because you're on this webinar. There's existing packaging and labeling requirements. There's measurements. There's scales. And then we try to take some of these more complex laws and break them down and make visuals for you. So here's how we compare all the different license types. And by some miracle, we happen to have an attorney on our team that knows how to use PowerPoint. It is not me, but we are very grateful for photography major attorneys. We have our chart of the shared ownership requirements. They did distribute their own chart. BMCR did at the scoping meetings back in September. It actually does have an inaccuracy in it. This chart used to be a lot less complicated. 837 gunked it up a little, as did some of the later bills. But it's still, if you try to read that law itself, you're going to end up sketching this out too. So if you pick a box here and follow, it actually works. We have the different agencies, what license types assigned to each. This again got updated because testing moved from OMCS to BMCR at the end of September. We look at an overview of the main requirements of the main 3 agencies and then their individual requirements. And a lot of people don't realize just how many other agencies are already involved. We've got Board of Equalization, Water Resources, CAL FIRE, Food and Ag, DOJ, Fish and Wildlife, Pesticide, Medical Board, Industrial Relations. Goes on and on. We've got summaries of the distribution and testing requirements as well as transportation, our timeline, water boards. So this is just an additional level of stuff that we're doing on top of the aggregation of the law as it sits today to try to really create as many tools. Last thing to show you real quick is we have just a plain language search. This is a great one when you know like there's a keyword you're looking for or a law you knew really well, or you just want to see every single law that talks about delivery. You can just type in the word delivery. And you're going to have all the laws that dealt with it. And first you'll see all the ballot measures, even every form that deals with it. And then you're going to get to the point where you're dealing with all the meetings that even talked about it and municipal codes that go into it. So you can do this really specific. You can do it really, all sorts of ways to play with these tools. The whole point of these is to be user-friendly, accessible, and again, we'll be happy to set up a demo where we can really personalize it to your needs and show it how it's going to best help you do your job. So with that, we really appreciate those of you who have stuck with us through this all, and we hope you learned something. And where can you meet us? We're going to be all over here for a bit in the coming 6 weeks. We're all over lots of places, but also if you go to CannaRegs, you'll see at the very top of our website there's Request a Demo. We can do demos remotely. You can also email info@CannaRegs. But these are places we'd be happy to do in-person meetings. We'll be at all these caucuses. I highly encourage the quarterly caucuses. They're great networking. CTCL will be in Denver. But we're going to be all over the Bay for Bay, SoCal, NorCal. And if you give us a really good excuse to be elsewhere, we'll be there too. So thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon. Somebody just wrote, CCIA is not the organization you think it is.
Thank you. Please stand by.